Thousands of players are teleporting all around the world using a new item called Aragriar's Whimsical World Warper. But after using the item a few times, they discovered something that, honestly, I didn't think could happen. You probably guessed, with the locations being randomized, that players were teleporting to some pretty interesting spots, like on top of statues, inside of dams, and even deserted islands. But the item is also teleporting them to areas that were supposed to be completely blocked off to players. And that made me wonder, where else could this item teleport you that you weren't supposed to be? So I cracked open the game's map files and began to investigate. And after scouring the world, I came up with a list of 15 secret places that you could teleport to when using the Whimsical World Warper. Number 1. The Secret Cave in the Stranglethorn Mountains. So this area is just south of Zul'Gurub and is largely unfinished, but there is a finished part of it that includes a really small cave that remains mostly empty. And while it seems just like another random scenery object, this is actually one of the most infamous caves in the game. So back in the game's alpha, players could get a mount called the Bengal Tiger, which was removed before the game went live. But that didn't stop players from trying to hunt it down, and pretty soon, rumors began to surface that this mount was actually still in the game. And one of those rumors was that it was sold by a secret vendor in this very cave. Now, hundreds of players ended up parkouring up the mountains to try and track this down, but sadly, even though they successfully got to the cave, they didn't find the vendor. Number 2. The Karaji Backlands. This is a largely unused area located in the dead part of the map of southern Silithus, right by the Ahn'Qiraj raid portals. Now, the front part of the Backlands, situated closer to the portals, just serves as a fancy raid prop to make Ahn'Qiraj feel more like part of the world, while the back half is mostly empty with scattered objects that are used throughout the raid. And although this area did remain unused for almost 20 years, it finally saw the light of day in 2023 during OTK's hardcore Makara tournament when it was used as the main dueling area. Number 3. The Greymane Wall. This area is found in the southern region of the Silverpine Forest and actually has a lot of in-game lore behind it. Before the Worgen city of Gilneas was added to the game in the Cataclysm, this massive scenery object served as the barrier to stop players from going where the city was actually supposed to be. Now, according to the game's lore, it was originally constructed in order to isolate the kingdom of Gilneas from the rest of the Alliance. But that didn't stop players from trying to breach the fabled city, and if they somehow managed to breach the gates, they were met with a largely empty pit. Well, some scattered trees and bushes, but yeah, just a big void space of where the city was supposed to go. Number 4. The Forgotten Shores of Quthel. This area is located in the dead part of the map in the northern region of the Eastern Plaguelands, just behind the Stratholme dungeon. And it was supposed to serve as the main settlement for the group of High Elves that left Kalimdor in order to continue practicing their birthright of arcane magic. Now, these guys would later become known as the Blood Elves and did eventually make it into the game during the first expansion, but they were actually a part of the game's world long before then. And although a very early and rough version of the race made it into the original release, the development team didn't really have the time they needed to flesh out the lands. So the only remnant we have is this small settlement. Number 5. The Dead Zone in Tirisfal Glades. This area is a Horde favorite and is located just west of the Undead starting zone. And it's also been the subject of some pretty wild speculation over the years, ranging from an old god being buried underneath it to it hiding some sort of hidden dungeon. But in reality, it's just an empty zone. Granted, there are some interesting texture patterns on the ground, but that was likely left over from a developer testing out some texture blending or some other terrain features. Number 6. The Oceanmane Village. This is a tiny Tauren settlement on the southern coasts of Silithus, and features a small village with some generic scenery and a pretty large cave that remains mostly empty. Now, according to the game's lore, this area was once home to the Oceanmane tribe who abandoned it long ago. But the cave is still home to a dragon named Andrestras, who apparently is waiting for his friend who was a brave in the Oceanmane tribe. And he says he won't leave until his friend returns. But sadly, the lore implies that his friend will never come back. Number 7. Old Ironforge. This area is conveniently located under the existing dwarven capital city of Ironforge, and features a massive cavern with crystals overhead, a couple winding corridors, and some molten lava underneath. Now, this area was sealed off until the Cataclysm, when King Manny Bronzebeard decided to break the seal in order to go down there and undertake a Titan ritual. He hoped that this ritual would provide some relief to the distressed elemental spirits around Azeroth, but it instead backfired and completely petrified him, turning him into solid diamond. And he would remain like that for several expansions. Number 8. The Ironforge Airport. Nestled in the snowy hills of Dun Maro, this area primarily served as visual eye candy for the nearby flight path. But the scenery around it suggests that it was meant for so much more. It's filled to the brim with animated NPCs, doodads, points of interest, and even a flight path setup. And several rumors about this area have popped up over the years, ranging from it being an alternate starting zone for the gnomes to being a part of the original Ironforge city that was much larger and had a lot more individual subzones than what we saw. And even though it's been referenced by various quests throughout the years, sadly, this area hasn't really been used for anything substantial in the game. Number 9. The South Sea Islands. This pair of deserted islands is found way off the southern coasts of Tanaris. And unlike some areas on this list, they actually had a purpose, as they were featured in the iconic quest Draconic for Dummies. Now, this quest was part of a much larger chain for the Scepter of the Shifting Sands, which was used to open up the gates of On Crator. And as such, very few players managed to find these deserted shores. Number 10. Newmans Landing. This area sits just southwest of the Dwarven starting zone, and at a glance, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot here. However, Newmans Landing has been the subject of some pretty wild speculation over the years, particularly with New Alliance players. Now, the theory behind this zone is that when you create a New Alliance character and you zone in for the first time, this is the default location where you spawn. For a split second, as the game is loading you in and creating all your character's data, you're actually loaded here before you're then teleported to your correct zone. Apparently, this sequence happens immediately as soon as you start the cinematic, so you don't really even notice it as a player. And the legend goes, even if you're in Newman's Landing and looking for this to happen, it'll only go down for a split second. But pretty cool nonetheless. Number 11. The Help Camps of Azeroth. Now, these areas actually aren't named help camps in the game's map files, it's just a name I gave them. Primarily because they're both simple camps and really high mountain peaks with the word help etched into the nearby terrain. The first one is atop a peak in the Wetlands and features a simple dwarven camp setup with a Stormpike's Guard banner. And the second is a small area high up in the Stone Talon Mountains with just the word help carved into its side. And as you could probably guess, both of these don't really have a purpose. They were probably just added to amuse other developers. Number 12. The Dun Maro Plane Crash. This area takes us back to the snowy hills of Dun Maro and features a pretty interesting setup. On one side, we have what appears to be a broken down plane, and on another, we have a very simple, impromptu dwarven camp setup. And even though this hidden spot was given some more love than, say, the help camps, it still remains largely unused. And its primary purpose over the years has been just for visual eye candy for nearby flight paths. Number 13. The Dollar On Crator. Situated in the Alterock Mountains, this area was supposed to serve as the location of the forbidden mage city of Dollar On. Now, in the game's lore, the mages decided to conjure up a massive bubble in order to isolate themselves from the rest of humanity for their own safety. And for years, players wondered, was there actually a city behind this bubble? Turns out, no, there wasn't. It was just a bunch of empty flat land with some scattered scenery objects that overlapped with the barrier. But pretty cool as a player to finally be on the inside as opposed to just looking at the shiny bubble. Number 14. The Stone Talon Settlement. This area is situated in the northwest mountains of Stone Talon and features two zones. We've got some dilapidated Night Elf ruins and a pretty interesting lumber mill setup. Now, both of these areas are just themed based on their nearby zones, but it seems like a lot of love went into them, particularly the lumber mill. But they were never really given a purpose, so we can only assume they were left for visual eye candy for a nearby flight path. Number 15. The Wetlands Farm. Located just southeast of the Menethil Harbor, nestled high up in the mountains, we've got a pretty interesting area. It's a massive plot of land featuring various buildings, animated NPCs, interactable doodads, a working signpost, and even a fully fledged farm. And it seems like a lot of thought and care went into the layout of the zone. But sadly, it doesn't really have a purpose, and as you guessed, much like its predecessors, we can only assume it was left for visual eye candy for a nearby flight path. And that about wraps up this list. Now, I want to go ahead and stress that this wasn't intended to be comprehensive by any means. There are probably some more secret or hidden areas you could teleport to, and maybe, if we're lucky, there are some new hidden spots that we have yet to discover. But what do you guys think? Have you been to an area that was featured on this list, or even one that wasn't? Let me know in the comments below.